Good evening and welcome once again to the Lotus Flower Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pamela Robinson, and I am super excited to have you all join me this evening again in this virtual and audio space. This is the day that the Lord has made, and I am rejoicing, and I am so glad in it. As we celebrate Black History Month, I want to remind you all that being Black is not a monolith, meaning that just because you see me on the screen as an African American woman and you see so many African American people throughout the United States and all over the world, that doesn't mean that we're all the same, that we all talk the same, that we all live the same, that we all work the same, that we all believe the same way, that we are all the same. This episode and the episodes throughout the month of February, they will be here with you to let you see the different varieties of African American people that are amongst us. Black is not a monolith. To consider those words is to consider the full breadth of the human experience. Black people, we don't move as one, but rather we move in all directions toward and away from each other. Black Americans represent 13.4% of the population, and with more than 40 million people who identify as Black, this community represents a vast, diverse variety of backgrounds, expectations, political views, music, and culinary taste and perspectives. Despite the vast array of cultural and ethnic backgrounds, both lived experiences and professional experiences, African Americans are united by brown skin. However, they're often crammed into this one little box by society, packed right on in as if they are one. Black people are not a monolith, nor is the way that they express themselves. So I want you to join me throughout the entire month of February as I highlight the vast array of cultural and ethnic backgrounds that are experienced by African Americans. Now, tonight, this episode, I am going to share excerpts from the book Shifting: The Double Lives of Black Women in America by Cherise Jones and by Cumelia Shorter Gooden, PhD. According to the authors, they did a project which consisted of a 2-year-long survey of African American women. And when they surveyed these African American women, the women said that they felt pressured and compromised to show their true selves, that they oftentimes would shift their outer appearance to fit in to certain situations. They would shift their speech. They would shift white as they headed to work in the morning and Black as they came back home each night. They shift inward, internalizing and steering pain of the negative stereotypes that they encountered daily. And sometimes they shift by fighting back. Now, I want you all to be sure to listen intently and take note as I talk about this thought-provoking topic, code shifting. This episode is streaming tonight on the Dr. Pamela Robinson Facebook page and on the Lotus Flower YouTube channel. Also airing on wherever you find your podcast audios. Be sure to like, comment, and to subscribe to the Lotus Flower Podcast. In doing so, each time the episodes air, you will have that episode drop right there into your inbox, and you'll never miss an opportunity to be blessed and have your life enhanced by these episodes. I want you to know that some episodes you'll have me, and some episodes you'll have a guest. But every time you come into this space, you will be blessed by what you hear. Tonight, once again, this episode is about code shifting. And you might say, well, what is code shifting, and what do you mean by code shifting? I want you all to go with me and for a moment, and I want to give you an opportunity to think about what you think that word means. So before I go into the topic and what it means, I want you to type in the chat for me what you think it means when I say code shifting or shifting. Think about it a moment, and I'll give you a moment to type some things in the chat before we go any further. Have you had a moment to type it in the chat? I see a few things there in the chat. Now I want to see a few more people respond in the chat before I go any further. Okay. I see some people say that they feel that shifting means that when you are behaving one way in one room and you behave another way in another room. That's correct. See, another person said that they believe that shifting means that you're selling out to your true self because you're afraid to be yourself. I see another person has responded and said that they believe that shifting means that they cannot be themselves because they won't be accepted. So they actually will put on a whole nother face when they go into work. Yes, all of those answers are correct this evening. Code shifting. Well, the authors of the book that I am going to share these excerpts from, Miss Cherise Jones and Ms. Kamua Shorter Gooden, PhD, they have said that after a 2-year-long study that they conducted with African American women, out of this extensive project, they found that African American women were impacted by racism and sexism throughout America. They set out to learn, why was this happening? Why were these Black women experiencing racial and gender stereotypes, bias, discrimination? They wanted to know what it felt like. They wanted to know how these women would react and respond to this. They also wanted to know the impact that racism and sexism had on the women. They're on their relationships with men, on their lives as being mothers, on their experiences at their local places of worship, their experiences in the work world. They wanted to know how these African American women were impacted by racism and sexism, and how this may have caused them to have to shift. Now, as I go further in talking about shifting and what it means and what it is, the shifting principle is another way to say that I am going to actually present myself one way when I'm at work, or whatever setting I might find myself in that's outside of my normal comfort zone. I'm going to present myself in one way, and then I'm going to present myself in another way in a different setting. And why am I going to do that? I'm going to do that because this is my way of being able to fit into society. And that's why people oftentimes will find themselves shifting from one thing to the next thing to fit in. Now, the authors of this book have said that through their research, they have found that African American women, by far, are the most resounding women that find themselves dealing with the most pervasive race and gender bias myths. Now, out of the 97% of women that these authors surveyed, many of these women were persistent about keeping quiet and shifting in order to fit in, especially to fit in to their workplaces. Why? Because they did not want to make waves, because they were afraid that if they made waves in the workplace, then perhaps they would lose their work altogether. Now, I'm going to read a direct quote from the book, and it says, "Our research shows that in response to this relentless oppression, Black women in our country have had to perfect what we call shifting. It is a sort of shifting here and a sort of shifting there and a sort of hiding behind their very own skin that African Americans have long practiced to ensure their survival in society. Perhaps more than any other group of Americans, Black women are relentlessly pushed to serve and satisfy others and made to hide them true selves and to placate themselves so that they can fit in with their white colleagues, Black men, and other segments of the community. They shift to accommodate differences in class as well as gender and ethnicity. From one moment to the next, they change their outward behavior, attitude, or tone, shifting white, then shifting Black again, shifting corporate, shifting cool. And shifting has become such an integral part of the Black woman's behavior that some adopt an alternate pose or voice as easily as they blink their eyes or draw a breath without thinking and without realizing that the emptiness that they feel and the role that they must play may be directly related. So these women are shifting from one thing to the next, shifting, oftentimes doing this in an invisible type way. And it's internal. It's something that just happens because it is a survival mode that they find themselves in. Now, there are many ways that Black women shift that have changed over the course of time, of course. Now, an enslaved Black woman or a Black woman living under the hills of Jim Crow would have shifted literally, would have cast her eyes downward, moving her body off to the side, or moving her body all the way to the back of the bus so that white passengers could sit in the front. However, today's shifting is more subtle, it's more insidious, keeping silent when a white colleague sexually harasses her for fear that she will not be believed, acting eager but not aggressive at work, so not to alienate her white boss, and then shifting again at home to appease a Black man who himself has to live with the pain and unfairness of society's prejudiceness and hate. Shifting. Shifting is a source of relentless oppression. Shifting is what she does when she speaks one way in the office and another way to her girlfriends, and still another way to her elderly relatives. Shifting from one personality to the next personality in order to fit in. Now, it is what may be going on when she enters the beauty parlor with dreadlocks and then she comes out with straightened hair, or when she tries on 5 outfits every morning looking for the best outfit so that she can camouflage her ample derriere. And shifting is often internal, it's often invisible. It's the chipping away at her sense of self-worth, at her feelings of wholeness and self-centeredness, often a consequence of living amidst racial and gender bias. Shifting. But as we celebrate African American History Month, we want to be sure to remember that the pervasive race and gender biases that are still prevalent in our society are just that. They are myths. Myths that can be and must be broken. To shift is to work overtime when you are exhausted to prove that you are not lazy. It's the art of learning how to ignore a comment you believe as racist, or to address it in such a way that the person who said it doesn't label you as threatening or aggressive. It is the over-preparing for an honors class only to prove that you are capable, intelligent, and hardworking, or trying to convince yourself that you really are okay, no matter what the broader society says about you. It's feeling embarrassed by another African American who seems to lead on with this stereotypical behavior, and then feeling ashamed just because you feel ashamed. Sometimes shifting is fighting back. Now, there are few high achieving Black women who are not adept at shifting, and few others who, whatever their proficiency, did not find themselves shifting in order to survive. But sometimes, in their endless quest to prove themselves, they put others, and to put others at ease, many Black women, they find themselves breaking down emotionally, physically, because of all the pressure that is on their lives, and they find themselves stripped of their own joy. Sometimes, as they are unable to withstand the onslaught of all these negative messages, their sense of self worth falters. And as they start to believe the falsehoods, doubting their own self worth, questioning their own capabilities, they become susceptible to an array of psychological problems, including anxiety, low self esteem, disordered eating, depression, and even an onslaught of self hatred. They may have often comforted themselves through prayer, fasting, reading, going to the gym, exercising, and learning to love themselves. Yet and still, they oftentimes find themselves conflicted and alone. Why? Because they find themselves having to shift. Shifting, as I stated, is often an invisible act that they find themselves doing. Now, research consistently shows that Black women are less happy and experience more discontent than Black men, or white women. For example, in the National Center for Health Statistics study of more than 43,000 US adults, Black women were 3 times as likely as white men and twice as likely as white women to have experienced distressing feelings like boredom, restlessness, loneliness, depression in the past 2 weeks. Through the study by Dr. Guter and Mrs. Gordon, they found that most Black women shift their behavior to accommodate others. A majority of women in this survey indicated that at times they have changed the way they act in order to fit into or be accepted by white people. Of the 79 women that were surveyed in this, they found that they downplayed their mannerisms and they downplayed different controversial topics when in the presence of their white counterparts. They also found that Black women frequently submerged their talents and strengths to support Black men. 40% of women surveyed have at times downplayed their abilities or strengths with Black men. In the most extreme cases, Black women who don't feel good about themselves, who feel pressure to fulfill traditional roles by being passive or submissive, or who feel that they must give up parts of themselves in order to secure that male partner, may put themselves down and even risk emotional and physical abuse in order to shift to remain in that relationship. Sexual abuse and harassment of Black women. It is all too frequent. Many Black women suffer silently as victims of childhood sexual abuse or adult sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. The myths and the stereotypes about Black women being promiscuous may make it more difficult for Black women to feel comfortable speaking up about their abuse experiences, and the tendency to be silent about gender abuse in the Black community makes it particularly difficult if the perpetrator is a Black male. Now, there is an increasing amount of pressure on Black women to meet these conventional heavy beauty standards. Now, what do you mean, Dr. Robinson? To be able to be accepted in society, oftentimes Black women feel as though they've got to be the epitome of beauty in order to be accepted. They've got to have the right hairstyles, the right skin tone, the right hair texture, the right body shape, the right weight. The feeling of being unattractive haunts many Black women and impacts their self-esteem and relationships with men. Now, these feelings can also put Black women at risk for eating disorders to which they were previously thought to be immune. Black mothers are acutely aware of having to train their children to cope with discrimination. Mothering Black children involves usual parental task of providing for the children's basic needs and supplying nurturing and guidance. In addition, Black mothers are almost always involved in socializing their girls and boys to cope with the reality of racism. And they often engage in educating their girls about the dynamics of sexism, and they engage in educating their Black boys about the discrimination amongst them, that they are oftentimes haunted targets that will be shot down for no reason by some of the police force. Not all, but some. And so they have to sit down and have a conversation with their boys that goes something like this. Make sure that if you're stopped by the police, that you don't have your hands in your pocket, that you don't reach for something in the glove compartment, that you don't say anything that comes across as though it's a bad tone or being aggressive in any way. Make sure that you say nothing and that you do everything that they tell you to do without hesitancy. They have those conversations because this is the way that they have to socialize their children. Black women have disproportionately higher risk of depression. Black women are particularly at high risk for depressive symptoms and clinical depression. Yet Black women often mask their depression, submerging it in the busyness and being superwoman and overeating or overspending. Black women often feel discrimination and they feel discriminated against by society as a whole. Yet and still, Black women are resilient. They are able to achieve in spite of the myths that society has put on them. In spite of being misunderstood, mistreated for many, many, many years, Black women regularly are able to rise above these stereotypical situations. Why? Because of the tenacity that they have, because they are able to be resilient. They're able to have that bounce back spirit. They're able to find their inner voice. They're able to look beyond the exterior of what's going on and look to the Lord Jesus Christ for their source of strength. They're able to find power and to find hope and to find peace, even in the midst of trying situations. Now, there are many myths that Black women have been able to overcome. And in overcoming those myths, it is my hope that the shifting that they have to do oftentimes will be an inspiration for younger Black women that are coming up behind them. That shifting that they find themselves doing, that is oftentimes internal and invisible, that it will be a source of strength and a source of hope for all that come in contact with them. Have you ever felt the need to have to change the way that you act in order to fit in or to be accepted by people? Or if you felt this way, then you know exactly what I mean when I say shifting or when I say code shifting. Feeling invisible and figuring out a way whereby you will be able to still continue on, but yet and still not being your true self. And that is the definition of shifting. Now, tonight, as I shared this topic, it is a weighty topic to talk about, but it is a topic that needs to be spoken about. And especially during the time where we have set aside 1 month for African American history to be honored and to be looked at. Now, we know that African American history goes on 12 months out of the year and not just 1 month in February. However, since we are honoring African Americans in the month of February, then the Lord had put it in my spirit to make sure that I spoke about African Americans and to share that we are not a monolith and that we all function differently and that we all are able to become the people that He would want us to be and rise to the occasion on the wings of those that have come before us, our forefathers, and never to forget all that they did for us to be sitting right where we're sitting now. Now, I want you to take away from this episode this evening that was a bit difficult maybe to listen to, but there is hope. There's always hope. HOPE, having only positive expectations. Hope. My hope is that African American women that find themselves having to shift, that when shifting, it is imperative that each and every one remembers who she is, that she's affirmed in her own gifts. And to those that are her sisters, that the sisters are affirmed, the daughters are affirmed, the mothers are affirmed, the grandmas are affirmed. You are affirmed in your own gifts as to what the Lord has given you. I want you to recognize that your opinions have value. I want you to recognize that your beauty outshines the outside and it brings out the inside beauty that you carry. that unsung, unique song that's inside, I want you to know that it is important that you know your own threshold, that you know when it's too much shifting going on. I want you to remember that no matter how far you might have wandered off of life's beaten paths, I want you to know that it is never too late to find your way back to yourself, back to who the Lord made you to be before the foundation of the world. Shifting the double lives of Black women in America. I want you to be sure to get a copy of this book. It is available on Amazon or wherever you purchase your books. Shifting the Double Lives of African American is based on the African Americans Women's Voice Project, written by Sharice Jones and Camilla Shorter Gooden, PhD. Also, I want to mention a few other books that I've been reading, and I want to suggest that you would read these books as well, especially during African American History Month, to educate yourself even more on what you may already know about African Americans, about yourself, or those that want to be more culturally astute or culturally relevant or culturally affirming. I am reading for the second time this book, The New Jim Crow. The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness by Michelle Alexander. I was able to actually be in the presence of Ms. Alexander at one of the African American MLK events here in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was the keynote speaker, and it was amazing to be in her presence. This book, it says, once in a great while, a book comes along that changes the way we see the world and helps to fuel a nationwide social movement. The New Jim Crow is such a book, praised by Harvard law professor Lainey Gunner as a brave and bold book. It challenges the notion that the election of Barack Obama signals an era of color blindness. So I'm not going to read more of the excerpts, but I want you to get your copy of this, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Color Blindness Age by Michelle Alexander. Also, I have read this book, and it is called My Grandmother's Hands. My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Rashima Mikenu. This book is an amazing book. My daughter was required to purchase this as one of her textbooks when she was pursuing her social work degree at Western Michigan University. And she told me about this book. And then I purchased it because I love reading, and especially history and things about African American, to learn more about myself. So I purchased this book, My Grandmother's Hands. And on the back of the book, there is one of the people that wrote in to give a comment on the book said that My Grandmother's Hands will change the direction of the movement for racial justice. The body is where our instincts reside and where we fight, flee, or freeze. My Grandmother's Hands is a call to action for Americans to recognize that racism is not only about the head, but also about the body. It says the author introduces an alternative view of what we can do to grow beyond our entrenched racialized divide and take readers through a step by step healing process based on the neuroscience and somatic healing methods. My Grandmother's Hands. I would recommend you get a copy of that. Now, the last book that I want to recommend that you get a copy of so that you can learn more about African Americans, you can learn how to be more culturally affirming, how to embrace the Black culture, and you that may be African Americans can learn more about yourself and how to be more affirming to those amongst you. This book is one that will encourage African American women and women all over. This is a book that I have read maybe 10 years ago, and I still keep in my library. This book is by Dr. Patricia D. Bailey, and it is entitled Women Risk Takers. It's your destiny to reach higher, stand stronger, go further. Risk takers. God is calling women to a task much greater than themselves to change the world. Dr. Patricia D. Bailey believes that to do so, you must fully understand and embrace the truth that women, when God gave you the mandate, He also gave you the power to accomplish it. Dr. Bailey wants women to overcome all obstacles, both real and or imagined. Step boldly into your God-given places. Women risk takers. Women change their world by studying the lives of great women of the Bible, such as Rahab, Esther, Hagar, Hannah, Abigail, Deborah, and many others, and showing that the common denominator for accomplishing something great is simply the willingness to be a risk taker for God. God promises that you can do all things through Christ Jesus that strengthens you. This promise has been proven over centuries in the lives of women and are just as certain today to be fulfilled in you and through you, woman of God. Now, are you ready? Are you ready to accomplish great things? I know that you are. I would like to thank you all for joining me this evening for the Lotus Flower Podcast, season number 3, episode number 41, as we talk about code shifting. Thank you all for subscribing to the podcast. Thank you all for commenting on the podcast. Thank you all for sharing the podcast with your family, friends, and loved ones. I would love to see you all again next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, streaming live right here on the Dr. Pamela Robinson Facebook page and streaming live on the Lotus Flower YouTube channel. Also, you may watch the podcast in the replay 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You may also listen to the podcast on wherever you find your audio podcast. Now, I want you to know that there'll be times on the podcast that you will have me on And I'll be here in this virtual and audio space sharing with you from what thus saith the Lord. And there'll be times that you will be here with me and one of my very special guests. And I want you to know that there is always a place of welcome waiting for you right here on the Lotus Flower Podcast. And remember that it is the flower that blooms in adversity that is the greatest of them all, the lotus flower. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. May God bless you. Bye bye for now.